Major Spoilers podcast covers news, reviews, and of course, spoilers, and goes into details about the topics discussed. So if you haven't read, listened, or watched the items we talk about, you might want to come back later.
I'm Matthew.
Rodrigo.
And I'm Steven, and you're listening to the Major Spoilers podcast, the podcast for pop culture and comic fans.
In this issue, one of these days, Tintin, bang, zoom, destination moon. Plus, we examine what's entering the public domain, revisit the works of a genius called Jim, and ask, what if? What if, or what for? And if not, why not? Third base. Remember, the Major Spoilers podcast may cause dizziness, confusion, dry mouth, and a love of pop culture. Ask your doctor if the MSP is right for you. We're so hot, it'll make you itch. It's over the counter, and it's on the air.
Welcome to issue 1108 of the Major Spoilers podcast. If you're not questioning reality at this point, I think you're probably doing it wrong, but here we are again. Feels like a repeat all over again. Yeah, we're even going to be talking
again.
Yeah, here we go again. I mean, we'll be talking about Tintin later in the episode, but that also means we'll also be talking about Tintin at the beginning of this episode, because Tintin went into public domain on January 1st, 2025. Tintin and what is it, the Evil Soviets or whatever it was released in 1929. And so the Tintin character, as he appeared in that comic, is public domain. So if anybody wants to use Tintin for whatever they want, they are free to do that. Same way with Popeye the Sailor Man. He went into public domain. Olive oil was already in public domain. The use of spinach as Popeye's deal didn't appear until 1931, but some Harvard law professors went and dug around, and they found out that the copyright for that particular strip was not renewed. So spinach has been in public domain since like 85 or something like that. So there you go. Those are just a couple of the many things that went into public domain in 2025. Matthew or Rodrigo, what are some things that you noticed in the public domain list that you are excited about that is now in the public domain? Let's start with Matthew.
Well, I don't know if everyone listens to all of our shows or if this show is going to be available before that show, but I was totally psyched to see the Skeleton Dance, the first Silly Symphonies cartoon, going into the public domain. I thought that was kind of cool. I'm always fascinated by what is and isn't considered public domain. I guess that's just, I don't know. Sometimes the rules don't seem to make sense, and it feels like, hey,
well, what part of it do you not understand?
Well, like there are some where it's like, this has been in the public domain for 25 years. And then you're just like, right.
So
multinational corporations.
Yeah, no. So what happened was there was supposed to be a Copyright Extension Act in 1985. And there was a time before that, I don't remember the exact date. But there were two times where copyright owners could file an extension for their works. So there were some questions about superhero characters falling into public domain if they hadn't extended their copyright. And it was a one-time thing where the government was like, hey, listen, if you have works that came out before 1920, whatever it was, this is your one time that you can go back and extend your copyright for another 25 years or whatever it is. And then after that, you can't. So there are some things like Mickey Mouse that did get copyright extended, and Popeye that did get copyright extended. And then there are some things like the Superman Max Fleischer cartoons that did not get copyright extended. And so those Max Fleischer cartoons went into public domain in like the early 80s, I want to say, or around 1980, 1990, when they went into public domain. So that's why there was that one-time filing for a copyright extension beyond that. And so after that, that's why 5-6 years ago, whatever it was, all of a sudden we started to celebrate Public Domain Day, where all these things that were done before 1932 or whatever it is, started going into public domain. And the first year that it happened, we had a flood of stuff that hit the public domain. And it was very, very exciting. But then it kind of died off as far as excitement for people, because a lot of the things that came out between that initial launch and last year 2024 were not really big things. But then in 2024, Mickey Mouse as seen in Steamboat Willie went into public domain. And of course, Minnie Mouse, Pig Leg Pete also went into public domain at that point. There were about a dozen more Mickey Mouse cartoons that went into public domain this year. And then, of course, the Silly Symphonies, the Skeleton Dance, as you mentioned, also went into public domain. So I don't know if that answers that question for you, Matthew, or not.
I think it does, because I think I had missed the significance of that, but the actual Copyright Extension Act. But
Yeah.
I did want Rodrigo to notice that Un Chien Andalou, that movie which scarred us all for life, now in the public domain, so it can scar everyone openly with no fear
For
of copyright.
free.
Yeah. Also,
Yay!
This is not a pipe. The Treachery of Images is also public domain this year.
Oh,
Not that people couldn't or weren't already just lifting that right as it was and re-releasing it. Rodrigo, was there something that you saw in the list that you were excited about?
Yeah, so I okay, so there's a difference between recordings and musical compositions, right? So
Yes.
as far as musical compositions, Singing in the Rain is now in the public domain,
Mhm.
which means you can record a new version of Singing in the Rain without worrying about it. But the sound recording specifically of Rhapsody in Blue,
Yes.
also just enter the public domain. I think Rhapsody in Blue had already been in the public domain. is,
Yeah.
my
The musical
understanding.
composition. Yes.
So now, I mean, I don't know what you're going to use this for, but
Well, it
definitely
means
Sing in
that
the
we
Rain.
can. It means we can
I
open. So yeah. Go ahead. Keep going.
And I was going to say, I also didn't realize that Bolero was not.
Yes,
in the
that's the
public
other
domain.
one that's really
That is
amazing.
like Bolero is huge. If you haven't sat
Mhm.
down to listen to Bolero
Or seen a
I mean,
movie
now
with
you-
Bo Derek, then yeah.
or seen a movie with Bo Derek,
Or worn the jacket.
then or gone bowling there, then what are you doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
think
the
it
interesting
could be
thing
a
is
Bolorama.
what are you going to do with those things? Certainly I can take that recording of George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and we could play it right now if we wanted to. It could be playing underneath this whole thing. And as long as we're using that recording of it, then we're free and clear. What we can't do is we can't take John Williams and the Boston Philharmonic. I think that's the one that he conducts.
John
and
Williams
take-
and the Two on Brass, actually, I think.
Yeah, we can't take the Boston Philharmonic as conducted by John Williams recording Rhapsody in Blue and play that, because that is a recording that is unique to John Williams and the Boston Pops, right? But we could take that. We could take that George Gershwin song and we could play it, and we wouldn't get in trouble with anyone.
Yeah, it's important for definitely for musicians, right? Most of the stuff, I mean, obviously Popeye entering the public domain, I think is a big deal, because
It
Popeye
is.
really used to be a big deal. He's like Popeye has lost a lot of clout in the ensuing, century, but still a very there's still a lot of Popeye stuff around that was like important for animation history, definitely.
Mhm.
Again, all that animation stuff still under copyright.
It is, right? So that's the other thing
so
people have to
that's
keep in mind. Yeah, that's
always
the other thing.
important to get it exactly right.
Yeah. So, you would, because that's a whole different thing. And the only version of Steamboat Willie, the only version of Mickey Mouse is the one that appeared in Steamboat Willie, and the ones subsequently that came out this year, the dozen or so, including the first full talking Mickey Mouse cartoon in public domain. But you also have to realize that more modern versions of Popeye are probably, from what I understand from what Duke University was talking about, it feels like even modern versions of Popeye are in the public domain, because Popeye specifically, when he first appeared fully formed. He had the squinty eye. He had the sailor suit. He had the corncob pipe. He had the big
Right.
forearms with the anchor tattoo on them. So if those are the things that define Popeye, then even modern versions of Popeye could be considered in the public domain. The weird thing, and I was starting thinking about this since the first, is that Disney really kind of shrugged its shoulders. And, 4 or 5 years ago, I was telling my students, be watching because you're going to hear Disney trying to extend the Copyright Act again, because there's no way that they're going to allow Mickey Mouse going to public domain. And and Disney just kind of shrugged its shoulders and was like, meh, we've got Mickey Mouse protected by other means. And what they're talking about is through trademark. And I started thinking about that on January 1st when I was reading about the Popeye and the Tintin is, okay, we are celebrating the fact that these things are now in the public domain. Public domain means that we can go out and we can create new works. We can create derivative works out of these things. We can go in and reprint these things. We can do whatever we want with these characters, these music, these songs, these books, including Red Harvest, which is the Fistful of Dollars, Jimbo story from Dashiell Hammett, as well as Maltese Falcon, both in the public domain. So we can go out and we can remix that stuff all we want. We can put Steamboat Willie, Popeye, and Tintin and have them in a great adventure if we want to. And it's totally legal to do that because that's what the founding fathers wanted. The problem is, at some point, Mickey Mouse as a look, and Disney has trademarked multiple iterations of the Mickey Mouse look. So if you look probably about 1940, 1950, you will see that there's a trademark for that Mickey Mouse, the 1960s Mickey Mouse, the 70s Mickey Mouse, so on and so forth. They keep trademarking Mickey Mouse to where they're just like, well, Mickey Mouse may be in public domain. And even, 20 years from now, when the 1950s version of Mickey Mouse technically goes into public domain, Disney can still protect it with trademark. So the big question that I was pondering is, how long do we get to celebrate public domain day before we run into, well, yes, these things are in public domain, but can you even do it because of trademark law? Right. And so that's the interesting thing, because the Supreme Court has actually weighed in on this. And I would like to get a little bit more clarification from someone who's a trademark lawyer, is that the Supreme Court, Justice Roberts, specifically said, the thing about trademark is it does not have an expiration date. Right. So, but the Supreme Court under Roberts, the lead, whatever, commentator on the ruling was, trademark is there to protect the perception of the property, whatever that is, but it should not be an end around to subvert copyright. Meaning that if Disney and King Features and the Hearst publishers and all these people are sitting there going, oh, it's fine, we can let Popeye go into public domain because we still can go after you for trademark infringement. Mm-hmm. Is that something that, again, will probably have to be revisited by the Supreme Court to clarify that, at which point I think all these big corporations' heads are just going to explode. But theoretically, even when a 1950s or 80s version of Tintin hits public domain status, and we want to take Destination Moon and we want to reprint that or make t-shirts of it or whatever, the Heritage estate or whoever owns Tintin now, they could come after us for trademark violation, but really they can't, because this is where it's going to get really complicated. So I'm interested to see what will happen when you get into that question of how far will the government allow trademark to trump copyright? And the Supreme Court has kind of already ruled on that, but Disney and others have already said we will protect our trademark if people go and start infringing on, or it's not infringing, it is more altering the public's perception of the value of that property. So technically that Mickey Mouse, the Steamboat Willie horror thing and the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey thing, certain people like the A.A. Milne estate or even Disney could probably say, hey, Blood and Honey is actually tarnishing the value that Winnie the Pooh has in us making money. So we're going to keep you from doing that. That's certainly what Paramount has been doing with fan films. And I've got a bigger discussion on the value of fan films. But at what point do they start to say this thing, even though it is public domain, is still hurting our bottom line? And that's the big question.
Yep. And the Roberts Court almost always sides with the money. And I say
well,
that.
But not in that case, because Roberts did say it's not there to trump copyright. So, that's them saying, yes, we'll allow this, but realize that this is not a way to skirt the law. So that is the thing that I'm going to find most interesting in that.
Yeah. What I'm confused about, and I don't know if you have any insight on this, Steven, is the Fleischer Studios Superman
Mhm.
fell into public domain
Because they didn't renew the
Fleischer's-
copyright. Didn't renew the
Okay.
copyright. And because the
DC
Fleischer
or
Studios,
Warner Brothers or whoever didn't.
well,
renew the
because
copyright.
Fleischer Studios had just basically gone bankrupt and were out of
Right.
business, and those films were either not, I mean, certainly because they were licensed from Warner Brothers, they had that
Mhm.
license, and so Warner Brothers did not try to reacquire those films or copyright those films. And because the Fleischer Studios were gone, there was nobody there to renew that copyright. And so
But the
that's why
Fleischer
those things.
Popeye cartoons are
Those are
not.
no, because they are
all.
not. They're not. They're done by the Fleischer Studios. But if you look on those opening things where the boat comes together
Yeah.
and claps the thing, it specifically says a
The
King
UPI.
Features. Specifically says a King Features production.
Got it. Okay, so King Features maintained whatever copyright they
Yeah,
had,
and
whereas
the Hearst
Warner
and the
Brothers
Hearst
or
estate,
DC or whoever didn't.
Yeah, did not. And the same thing. There are many Mickey Mouse newspaper strips that went
Mhm.
into public domain because they didn't include the copyright on those strips.
Right.
So there's this weird series of Mickey Mouse commits suicide. It's
remember I've
a
seen
literal
those.
strip that those are in public domain because there was no copyright attached to those. Same way with George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Didn't have a copyright on it. So because it didn't have that copyright when it distributed, it instantly, the minute that movie hit the theaters, it became public domain. And you can argue and you can look at Night of the Living Dead as a perfect example of why public domain is so valuable and so important. Because if the modern version of the zombies, as portrayed in Night of the Living Dead, hadn't been in public domain, we would not have the plethora of modern zombie tales that we enjoy today. No Walking
Right.
Dead, no House on, none of your zombie shooter games. None of those things would exist because Romero, now granted, he kind of got screwed out of the deal, but Romero
Right.
would have been able to keep that copyright and been able to do anything he wanted with that zombie. Or more importantly, other people, if they wanted to do zombies like the Night of the Living Dead zombies, they would have had to have paid a royalty to Romero. But because it wasn't, it means anybody can do anything they want with that. And I think
And
that
we
is the
all now
perfect
have-
example.
Yep, we
Go
have the magic of Return of the Living Dead.
Yes,
One
exactly.
of the greatest films of the 80s.
Yes, and that's one of the great things about that. Now, the other thing that I find so kind of funny about this thing is that Red Harvest, which was originally called Poisonville, as it was laid out in Black Mass Magazine, people have made iterations of that, like I mentioned before.
Sure.
Not the Fistful of Dollars, Yojimbo. The Bruce Willis movie is a take on that. There have been other takes on Red Harvest. The interesting thing about that is somebody has been since at the beginning of 2024 was so proud because they had finally acquired the rights to take Red Harvest and make a new movie adaptation of it. And it's like, dude, if you could have just waited one more year, you would have been able to do it with no need to go get permission. So
Yeah, of course, even the stuff that's not on the public domain, there's lots of ways to sort of get around that, right? For example, you write a whole movie that just has some of the same beats, again, like Yojimbo or whatever, then, if you've transformed it enough,
yes,
then you don't have to worry about it. If you only
Well-
play a little bit, you don't have to worry
Right.
about it. So that's how people on the internet and around the world or whatever have been getting around that. In that, if it's for educational purposes, you can show it.
fair use.
If it's for parody purposes,
Mhm.
maybe you can't necessarily. I mean, you might be able to show a clip if it's for parody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole Triple X fan film stuff that we
Yeah.
had in the early 2010s or whatever, that was all, they called them parodies of Star Wars,
Right.
of whatever, Superman, whatever,
Mhm.
for that very specific reason. And they were able to get away with it. Now, the problem with that is, and this is why I think public domain is better than fair use, because in order to prove that you're using something for fair use, it has to meet one of the four pillars of fair use law. Otherwise, it's copyright violation. And so that's why people get very, very scared when Paramount comes and knocks on your door and says, hey, we heard you were doing a Star Trek fan film or a Star Trek parody or whatever. Please show us your work that lets us know that you're not making any money from it, that this is educational use, that this is parody, or I forget the fourth one, commentary, or
Commentary,
else we will sue you. And so
You
that
can
has
also,
chased a lot of people away.
yeah, we've talked about sort of like different looks for Mickey Mouse and like when did the spinach come in for Popeye. You can get into trouble for something like The Wizard of Oz. Like the Wizard of Oz books are in the public domain.
Right.
The Wizard of Oz movie is not in the public domain. I don't think.
Nope, not yet.
Up to another 10
So-
years.
We're getting close.
Even if you make a separate Oz thing, if you're borrowing stuff from the movie that is not in the book, you can get into trouble. They could potentially come after you. And I think Amazon owns the rights to all that stuff now. So it could potentially be a big problem for you.
Yeah, and I think that is that the fact that there are so many questions, unless you're willing to pay a lawyer, which if you're going after somebody who is a copyright lawyer, not Phil, the local lawyer who gets drunks out of jail on Saturday mornings, that costs a lot of money. And so do you want to really spend all of that money to prove fair use or to prove that this version still falls under public domain or whatever? That can be a real legal headache. And I think just that the fact that you have mega corporations like Amazon or Disney or Warner Brothers or whoever, Hearst Publishing, that could come after you. And for them, paying $10,000 to a lawyer is nothing. For you, paying $10,000 because you want to make your own adult-rated Popeye blow me down movie is going to probably not be worth that potential lawsuit of paying tens of thousands of dollars. And if you lose, you're going to have to pay those people even more money. So that's the thing that kind of keeps everything at bay, I think, right now, kind of unfairly. I'm sure Cory Doctorow and others would have some real thoughts on remix culture and public domain.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it. Like a big part of it is like, are you getting caught? Is the thing that you're doing big enough for them to even care, right? It's like there are
If there's a dollar to be made, someone's going to come knocking.
Well, you think so, but like for example, there are a lot of Pokemon fan games, like full-on games that people are making based on Pokemon. And for a long time, Nintendo was going in and shutting those down, and now they've kind of stopped because they've realized that a lot of them are small potatoes. Most of them are, in fact, not making any money, right? They're like doing it for free. And also because it actually is building their IP for free.
Yeah, and of course, when you go and sue the preschool that has Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs painted on the outside of the building, it makes you look like a real horrible corporation, even more so than you already are.
There are so many things that can factor into this, because every step of the way, there's like lawyers involved and there are decisions to be made. So when you see a full-on lawsuit like the Superboy stuff, for example, back in the day, that has already gone through all of those steps, right? It's like when you hear about a big public lawsuit, they've already asked the questions of like, do we even want to bother with this? Do we just want to settle? Do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? Like, does it meet all the public domain and or like fair use criteria? Is any of it in Creative Commons? Blah blah blah. Like all of that stuff has to be settled before that verdict that tells you yes or no, right?
Yeah,
right.
I think end of the day, and we'll wrap this conversation up here. I think at the end of the day is it's great that we have public domain because we do get to remix this stuff. If you want to go and do your own version of the Delta Airlines or United Airlines theme song, go out and do it. No one's going to give two flips, right? But I also think that when we talk about public domain, it's also a good reason why we have copyright, because copyright protects you, the creator. So this podcast is copyright Major Spoilers Entertainment LLC, which means that no one can come in and remix this show, take portions of this show out and use it somewhere else. They can't use our reviews, our discussions, our whatevers for their thing. Same way with Critical Hit, whether it's Void Saga or Punch All Nazis, or what was the space one that we did, the Pathfinder one? Drifters. The things that we created that are unique in that Void Saga, Punch All Nazis, that world, those things are copyright us. And so it protects us and allows us to make money off of those original creative works. And so when we look at Public Domain Day, it's also a good time to look at why we have copyright and what it's supposed to be there for, so that Amazon just doesn't come in and say, oh, well, we are going to do Critical Hit and we will call it the Void Saga and we will take all of these things and we will do whatever we want with it and we will make all the money, and this small company over here will make nothing. They'll turn around and try to sue us because they say they own it and they don't. You got to take the good and the bad. And yes, there are bad things about copyright, but there's also bad things about public domain. Take some time. Look at the Public Domain Day website. Duke University updates this every year. Just look at all those things that you could remix, and then also think about how can you create something unique in 2025. If you have some thoughts about Public Domain Day, you can join the conversation about this or a whole lot more over on our Discord server. The Discord server is absolutely free. I know, free, right? In 2025, who knew that free would be so appealing? We'd love to see you join us over there on our growing community of awesome spoilerites. There's a link in the show notes, and there are a bunch of happy people waiting to welcome you when you show up. All right, let us do some reviews from last week, Matthew. What if Galactus Transformed Hulk?
What if? Yes, what if? What if indeed? So, the thing that you need to know about any what if title is that a lot of times the premise isn't necessarily baked right into the name of it, if you know what I mean. Because a lot of times you'll be like, oh, what if Wolverine met the Hulk? Or what if Peter Parker wasn't Spider-Man? This one literally tells you right up front, Galactus is going to turn the Hulk into his herald.
Yep.
This is apparently the first.
Even though his name is Bruce,
several.
He's going to turn him into Herald.
Harold. Yeah. Bruce Harold. Harold Bruce. So what this really does is set you up for an expectation of how is this going to happen and what is it going to do? So written by Matt Groom, art by Alon Medina, with some, I want to say, Ron Lim cover art. I know Steven is a big Lim fan.
Oh, yeah.
Steven, yeah.
I like Ron Lim.
He's a big fan of having limbs, yeah.
Yeah.
Ron Lim is like 60 now. Oh,
I know, man. Right? Yeah.
The first thing that you need to know, and the thing that, honestly, just, ugh. Okay, so on the very first page, we're on the planet Wilhelmine, and from the sky comes a shiny figure, and it says, "Evacuate now, Galactus is coming," and he lands, and it's Bruce Banner. And he's coated in silver like the Silver Surfer, but his hair is untransformed. So I want you to imagine an Oscar statue with a toupee, a really bad Uncle George toupee. That is what they are giving us for the hero's look in this. And I'm taken aback by it.
Oh, but more so when he transforms into the Hulk, he ends up with, what is it when you break something in Japan and you fill it with the gold filling? Koriguri or whatever it is. That's what they do with the Silver Surfer as the Hulk, is he's all cracked up, but all of his cracked up bits are all gold.
You're thinking of Kinsukori.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly what you said. But I kind of like the visual of the Hulk, like constantly threatening to shatter out of the silvery field. It's kind of neat. Mm-hmm. It looks like as he moves, he's literally breaking his skin, and the skin is like repairing around him as he goes. I just can't get past the toupee. And even when he's Hulk, he has brown hair on top of his head. Now, okay. I get it. You're going for something.
You got to vent that gamma radiation somehow.
I suppose. My grandma said you do lose 80% of your gamma radiation through your head.
Yeah.
That's why you have to
wear a stocking cap.
The fallout, wear a stocking cap. Exactly. But I don't know. As the story goes on, I can kind of get past it. The Avengers show up. I'm not sure when this takes place or what universe, but it's basically a modern Avengers. So it's the modern version of
Well,
Captain Marvel.
It is definitely post Planet Hulk, or it's technically pre Planet Hulk, right?
Right.
Because the Avengers basically say, we made a mistake. We were going to shoot you off into space, but then Galactus came and said he would save Earth if we offered you up in exchange, which is very much like Planet Hulk. We need to shoot him off onto some other asteroid so he leaves Earth alone.
Yep. But at this point in time, Carol Danvers is already Captain Marvel instead of being Ms. Marvel as she would have been. And the Vision has the modern look of the Vision, although, I mean, the Vision is a guy in a yellow suit and a green cape. So, you know, all in all, once it comes together, it really turns into a big battle between Tony Stark and a cosmic-powered Iron Man armor with which he stole Dr. Doom's cosmic harness from Fantastic Four number 53, where Doom stole the power of the Silver Surfer. You remember, back in the day. And so he's fighting against a Hulk empowered by the Silver Surfer, or rather empowered as a Silver Surfer by Galactus. I don't know. The one thing I feel that could have made this haircut work would have been a surfboard. But there is also something very frustrating about this issue. After all of that build up and fighty, and I don't know if it continues because I know there are a number.
No, this is a one. All of these are one shots. So this week is What If Galactus Transformed Gambit. Mm-hmm. So he's gonna have the glowy eyes. He's gonna say Monsieur. Yeah.
Everybody run away. The Galactus be coming. He's going to take it. He's going to eat the whole planet. He's going to make it etouffee.
He say, woo.
Oh, they're pouring some wine, some of that mushroom. Get the mushroom. Oh, they do it good. Now, you take the mushroom, you just you give them a little saute, and then you throw them down there on East Asia and be like, oh, the baby's ready. Then you eat the whole planet. That's good. But this one ends with, I won't say a cliffhanger, but it just sort of stops. The Hulk is like, tell Galactus Hulk is coming. Okay. I feel like that is a setup for a second story wherein the Hulk finds Galactus, and then we get some punchy, fighty, and we get to see, silver toupee Hulk punching out the guy with the big purple antlers and the dress. And I wanted to see that. That to me was the point, or at least the thing that kind of, drew me into the question of Bruce Banner as the Herald of Galactus is, at what point does he turn around and punch Galactus right in the face? And I don't know. I feel like that, just the way that it ended, knocked a whole star off of the issue for me, because as I was getting into the battle and getting into genius Bruce Banner and genius Tony Stark head to head, blah, 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 it definitely felt like something very informed by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is okay up to a point. I feel like there's only 9 guys in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so would those stories focus on the same people over and over? But you can do a really good story with an overbearing, snotty Tony Stark and an equally genius, angry Bruce Banner. I do like the take on Bruce Hulk, Silver Hulk, and the transition points. It isn't like a "Rarg, now I'm evil." It's almost as though the power cosmic gives him the ability to still be a little Banner when he is Cosmic Hulk. I can't get past the haircut. I can't. 2.5 stars for me. It's got a lot of potential. I feel like Groom in the Marvel Universe was something I'm definitely interested in seeing more of, because I know Groom mostly from the Boom Studios Power Ranger stuff. And I really do like the overall, I want to say I like the art up to a point. I love their take on Captain Marvel. I really enjoyed seeing the Iron Man Hulkbuster, but I just felt like the way the main character was drawn kind of dragged me out of it. And the fact that it just sort of, and it is a $3.99 book. And I found that to be really cool, really nice, because
there were surprisingly a lot of $3.99 books that came out last week.
Yeah.
And Image Comics, I think, was all $2.99 books.
And I'm sitting here thinking, if I'm getting a one shot, that's probably gonna be $4, $5.99, something.
Yeah.
So a $3.99 book, but a $3.99 book that the story just feels like it stops because we got to the end of $3.99 worth of book.
Yeah.
Not a satisfying ending for me. 2.5 slices of meatloaf. Well drawn. There's a lot of potential here. I do want to see, 5 years from now, I can see Groom on a Fantastic Four or an Avengers or, one of the top tier frontline Marvel books and being like, hey, superstar Matt Groom as seen here.
Mm-hmm.
So, the bits and pieces of it are good, but my God.
Yeah.
At least make the hair silver.
Yeah, this week it is for the What If titles. I don't know if everybody watched What If Season 3 yet. I blew through that a couple of days ago. But this week, for synergy purposes, what if Mickey and Friends became the Fantastic Four? You could look forward to that. And then you have
Fantastic. Whoa.
What if Galactus transformed Gambit, and he does have his trench coat and pink hair and headdress. So you can look forward to that. I guess my thought was on the Hulk one was there was nothing really groundbreaking. I agree with you on the rating. I just didn't think there was anything that blew me away in that. So
yeah, it's an average comic, and there are things wrong with it that are not game breaking, but it is also not a book that I'm going to a year from now.
Yeah, it's a middle of the road. It's a middle of the road piece. Yeah.
What if Minnie Mouse becomes Captain Marvel?
That one's coming out pretty soon, or if it already came out. Yeah.
Minnie Marvel.
Yeah, and then Donald Duck has already become Thor. Donald Duck has already become Wolverine. Mickey Mouse and the Fantastic Four.
Is Donald going to be the Thing?
Let us look really quick. I forget. No, I think. Let's look.
Maybe Goofy's the Thing.
I feel like
Goofy
I grabbed the wrong one. The Human Torch.
So we have Donald is the Thing, Goofy is the Torch, Minnie is Miss Fantastic, and Mickey is Mr. Fantastic, or
Mouser Fantastic.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so from Boom Studios this week.
Savage Dragon, that's all I'm saying.
This week at Boom Studios, Jim Henson Presents. This is their anthology series. I think this is the only new single issue. They've got some trades coming out this week from Boom Studios. But this is an anthology series that brings together some of your favorite Jim Henson properties into a new comic book series in anthology form. And so this first issue kicks off with 3 different books. You have Fraggle Rock, and they are trying to keep a nasty pie from being made for the holiday season. The second one is a Farscape story, where there's a little bit of romance, but also a little bit of gambling and betting and racing of spaceships. And then there is a Dark Crystal story, which is what are the Gelflings? What if a twin Gelflings were born? They were different from one another, but the same. And what would the Skeksis do if they could test one and see if it affected the other? And so that's kind of a dark story right there. And also the fact that the Gelflings at this time are conscripted into the Skeksis army, and they believe that they're actually doing good in protecting their Dark Lord masters or whatever. I forget how they called them in the book. So you have the Farscape story has a little bit of adult content in it. Not that there's any nudity or swear words or anything like that, but just the fact that there's implications of sexual innuendos, and there's definitely gambling, which may put off some people. And then you have the very dark turn about the Dark Crystal. And then you pair that with Fraggle Rock. I'm a big fan of anthology series, but I think with anthologies, I think the pairing has to be right. So if you're a parent who's going out and you're buying Jim Henson Presents, and you're like, hey, this has got Fraggle Rock in it. My kids will love Fraggle Rock, even though that series hasn't been on TV in any shape or form for 20 years. They're going to love Fraggle Rock.
It's coming back.
I'm sure it is. And then you flip over to the Farscape story, and that one's my least favorite of the 3. And then you get into the very darkness of the Dark Crystal, and I don't think that this was a good pairing of stories. The Dark Crystal story is the one that seems like it will. I mean, it's called Part 1, so it will continue into issue 2. The other 2 are basically standalone, so they could switch those out later on. It wouldn't surprise me if we see a storyteller story that pops up in there. It would not surprise me if we see Jim Henson did Labyrinth, correct? Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if we see a Labyrinth thing pop up in there as well, here and there. So while I enjoyed all three of the stories as standalone, I think the pairing together of those three stories was off. At least when you think of who is the target audience. Now, granted, there's people that are 50 years old that grew up watching the Fraggles, and so you're probably diving into that with as much nostalgia as you have with Farscape and the Dark Crystal. So that may not be a big deal for you, but I think for people that might look at just, Fraggle Rock and buy it, and then suddenly you're confronted with, I really thought that Dark Crystal one was way dark. It was just like, let's kill a Gelfling, or let's do tests on this Gelfling just to see what happens, is just terrifying. And especially if you're a twin and you read that and you're like, oh, people want to experiment on me to see if something happens to my twin. I mean, that's like stuff of nightmare right there. So that, I mean, it was an interesting story. I thought it was well done, especially when you have one of the Skeksis kind of protecting the two Gelflings. I found that interesting. I mean, it's kind of like, this is the early days after the split, right? Yeah. There's definitely a lot of that in the book too. This must be shortly after the split, where the Skeksis are still trying to decide how they're going to get rid of what are their counterparts? The Mystics. How they're going to get rid of the Mystics. But at the same time, they're talking about, we have to get these Gelflings in to be our fodder or to be part of our army or whatever. Then one of the Skeksis is like, there's some twins. They will be part of my private guard. Meanwhile, he's talking to the other Skeksis and they're like, we should dissect these things and figure out what's going on with them. And the one that discovered him is like, whenever I'm not around, that's certainly something you can do. And then he gets called away, and the scientist Skeksis is like, let's go do something. And then begins that. And so it's like, it's dark. It's still enjoyable. The art is really good. You've got some good writers on this. So if you're looking at individual stories, each of them stands by themselves as very strong stories, with the exception of Farscape, which is just I bet 2 underwears, and no, I bet 3 food cubes. Beyond just pages and pages of that, I think everything is well done. It's the complete package that doesn't work for me. So 3 slices of meatloaf out of 5. It's a $5.99 book that also seems to impact a little bit of my taste onto this. But, if you're a fan of one of those 3 properties, go for it. If you are a fan of all 3 of those properties, definitely go for it. But the nice thing about the anthology is you might go in for the Dark Crystal and stick around for the Farscape, or vice versa. So that's really good.
Sci-Fi Channel Farscape?
Yes, because that was a Muppet. That was a Jim Henson's Creature Workshop that did all that stuff.
Oh, right. Yeah, they had a Muppet in the main cast. I forgot.
Yeah. And of course, Boom has been working with all these properties for years, so they're doing that as well. So good effort. Just didn't really knock me out of the park on the whole package. So that was out this week from Boom Studios. Rodrigo, coming out in a couple of weeks, we've got something from Mad Cave Studios.
Yeah. It is Kill Train number 1.
Kill.
Written by Olivia Quartero Briggs. Artist is Martina Niosi. So right off the bat, I'm a little concerned about this one because it sort of takes place in the future, and basically right off the bat, as you see the crawl explain things to you, is like, in the future, to control the population explosion. And I'm like, hang on a second. Here's my problem. Overpopulation arguments, and by association stories, are sometimes racist and almost always classist, right? And so I'm going in and I'm like, is this book saying something about that? Which, if it is, kind of regardless of what it is, like, well, at least the authors have considered it and they're going into it consciously. Or is this book being like, here's a premise that I want, and the reason is, overpopulation, right? Who's not worried about overpopulation? And the answer is people who have thought about overpopulation, right? So It's hard to tell from this first issue what the stance is. There is a clear like class thing where like people who have money don't need to get on the trains. The premise is due to overpopulation, the government in this specific city will every once in a while kill every person in a train that is just commuting back and forth to work or whatever. Just every single person on that train will be called, and that's it. They're dead. And it's kind of a lottery thing. They don't do it very often, but it's like everybody seems like okay with it, right? It's like something that has gotten to the point where like it's common knowledge enough that people are like, yeah, I'll risk taking the train. Or there's people who can't afford not to take the train.
Yeah, that gets into your class question, right? Because a lot of people would just be like, "Oh, well, I take my car to work every day."
And so the main character, who is kind of, I think, part of a higher class, but is now basically hovering into a lower class because of circumstances, is forced to take a train, and then wouldn't you know it, it happens to be a kill train at the end. Spoiler alert, but it's not that big a spoiler. Again, if you ever look at a solicitation, you'll be lucky if it only spoils the first issue. It might actually spoil the first season, but so I'm like, okay, all right. I'm like cautiously going in. I'm really gonna need a scene later where it becomes clear that the overpopulation angle is BS, or that whatever the overpopulation explosion was happened for like very specific in-universe reasons. Because again, this is walking that line, right? Even though it's like very clearly has that class consciousness to it, it still makes my teeth itch with the overpopulation as the member of a group that is often pictured in pieces that talk about overpopulation. It's like Mexico City, where I was born, and like Mumbai, and like, maybe you get one New York. So it still kind of makes me a little leery. That said, other than that, it's a very good comic. The art is very good. Martina Niosi does a great job. Like the character design, like all of the characters, most of the characters that we see are mundane characters. I don't have crazy haircuts or whatever, or wearing weird clothes, but they have kind of a strong, cohesive design. You can tell which characters which at all times. Different faces, different eyes. New characters are introduced close to the end, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, here's a brand new character that I haven't seen yet. I know that seems like maybe the bar is very low, but there are comic artists who like every character has the same face, right? Or they have like three faces, like two boy face, like old man, like protagonist man, and then pretty lady, and then nothing else. Niosi very much has a whole repertoire here and does a great job, especially since this also portrays violence and gore and vehicles. There's a lot of vehicles. I'm just like, wow, this has some futuristic vehicles, which obviously had to be designed. So really, this is like a great showcase for Niosi. So good job there. I'm gonna give this 3 slices of meatloaf. Again, I feel like it's an above average piece. I'm just like, let's look at Kill Train number 2 and see where it takes us. Something tells me that these problems will not be addressed in Kill Train number 2, but maybe they will in 3. It's kind of a cliffhanger ending, and something tells me that we're going to spend the whole next issue resolving that cliffhanger.
Do you think that we hit Battle Royale and everyone is like, yes, I've got to tell my own Battle Royale?
I mean, I think that a story or a plot is just sort of one aspect of a movie, right? A great example, we just got through the holiday season. If you look at something like A Muppet Christmas Carol, right? It's like that's not even like a Scrooge type thing. It's just a Christmas Carol, and then they just like cut it in half, poured a bunch of Muppets into it, and then also decorated it with Muppets on top, right?
Mhm.
And it changes the character of the piece in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways it enhances some of the piece, right? So it's like you can do battle royale again and again, as long as you are, it's like famously the Hunger Games is quote unquote
Right.
battle royale again.
Right.
But the thing about the Hunger Games is that they stick with it. They're like, okay, well, we started this revolution. Now we're going to write about like the logistics of this revolution and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay, all right. Like it might not be your thing, but it's like, all right, they're taking it somewhere, right? It's like, I think we can write these stories again. You can do, this is also kind of like The Purge, right? It's like
Mhm.
you can do other takes on The Purge. There's something that's fundamentally compelling about that sort of like domestic,
Turn.
not domestic violence, you know what I mean?
Turning on your fellow
or-
neighbor kind of thing, letting
yeah,
your
yeah,
morals
it's
roll
like
away.
human on human, neighbor on neighbor violence.
Yeah.
That is very compelling.
Kind of in that same sort.
Yep.
Thing,
It's like, oh, I'm a good person up until all of a sudden it's, kill or be killed, and you got to make decisions. All that stuff is always very compelling. You can put that in 1,000 different stories. The important thing is, or the important thing to me would be, what are you saying with it?
Mhm.
But also other important considerations is, what does it look like? What genre is it in? What medium is it in? Right? Because I feel like, because comics are dominated by superheroes, you can tell a lot of very similar non-superhero stories, and there's a lot more like patience and grace for them. Like
Mhm.
you can't just be like, I'm gonna like finally I'm good enough to be a comic artist. I'm gonna tell my superhero story, and it just be a very straightforward tights and cape superhero story, right? Everybody's gonna be like, well, this is boring.
Yeah.
But a similar story in a cartoon or a movie might still, maybe not in movies anymore, but in a cartoon or like written as a novel, might have much more grace
Mhm.
in that specific medium doesn't have an oversaturation.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Cool. Hey, Scott Edwards. Are you listening? Scott Edwards. We are saying thank you for becoming one of our newest patrons over at patreon.com/major spoilers. Dear listeners, if you want to get your name shouted out at the top of the show, or not at the top of the show, but right here, just like Scott Edwards did, then you need to head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/major spoilers. For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to 4 bonus exclusive episodes, including the Major Spoilers podcast pre-show, where you can listen to us ramble on. Today we were rambling on about Tom and Jerry, some theories about Tom and Jerry, as well as what we did over the holiday break. Warning, it may not be as boring as you think. You'll have to find out when you become a patron over at patreon.com/major spoilers.
Did you hear what he called you, Rodrigo?
Yeah, I'm less boring than I look, I think.
Yeah, see, exactly. All right, so as we do every year, it is time to take a look at Tintin, or Tintin, or Tintin, whatever, however you say it, by Herge, or Hergé, or Herja, or So this time around, we have finally reached the 1950s, and we can finally get Tintin off this planet and send him to the moon. We're sorry, Tintin died on the way to the moon. Destination Moon this week. I have thoughts, but Matthew, why don't you quickly run down the premise of this volume?
I'm sorry, I'm just... We made it.
It's okay. I you know.
Okay. So Tintin is a reporter, see, and he has these friends, Captain Haddock, who curses badly, and then there's these identical twins, and of course, Professor Calculus. But Professor Calculus is kind of the point of this one in that he's building a spacecraft to get them to the moon, right? So They're going to figure out how they're going to get to the moon. And then, of course, Captain Haddock is going to do something stupid because that's what Captain Haddock does. And then people die. Bad things happen. Is someone trying to sabotage the trip to the moon?
Yeah. So, Professor Calculus.
Mm-hmm.
People taking advantage of somebody who is clearly suffering from dementia?
Boy. When you say it.
Here's a tough thing about Professor Calculus. Professor Calculus is
a fictional character. Hearing. Well, that's number one, yes.
So, but that's the thing. When I see Professor Calculus making mistakes and being a big old dummy, like I kind of feel, and I just spent my whole review talking about class issues. I'm going to come out and say it's kind of like this ableist thing of like you try to talk to a person that's hard of hearing and they can't hear you, so you think they're dumb, right? Literally,
stupid,
like deaf and dumb, like kind of stuff. Like there's a reason why that has come to mean stupid, right? So to me, a lot of the time when I see Calculus is like he's an absent-minded guy, but like a lot of the time I feel like it's kind of this like smear of like, yeah, I mean maybe he's old and has dementia, but like a lot of the time I feel like it's like the deaf stuff that creates
certainly
the hilarious situations.
Certainly they use the deafness quite a bit for comedic purposes here, but there are also times where he's literally forgetful on what happens. And you can just say, oh yes, that's absent-mindedness. That may also be a sign of something even deeper. Now, granted, in the 1930s through the 50s, they probably didn't think about those kinds of things in depth. That's one of the great things we can do is look back and click our tongues at the past and how insensitive they were. But I really feel like Professor Calculus has some serious issues that people were just taking advantage of and not trying to address.
See, and the absent-minded professor trope is, a thing, especially in this era. But it's difficult to say because it's hard to look at this and say that Calculus is meant to be elderly because his hair is still, solid black. His mustache is black. But as we go through this, as soon as you said that, I went, oh, what? Because not only does he mishear things, and not only does he try to listen through the captain's pipe, which there are a lot of things that should warn you that a corncob pipe with teeth marks on it that smells like
it's not an
tobacco.
ear horn.
Yeah, is not your ear horn, your tin horn, whatever you need. But then there's also that question of, is that because his brain is so overwhelmed, with calculus? I don't understand math. I'm a liberal arts major, so I don't really know literal rocket science. Is it supposed to be is Professor Calculus so overwhelmingly thinking in his brain and constantly, fourth dimensional, here's the blueprints for this, and I'm going to use this and the other and thing, and then there's, but when you said that, I'm just like, oh, are we back in the Congo? Because I was creeped out throughout the Congo, and I was a little bit unnerved throughout this whole volume, and I could never quite put my finger on it.
Is it because there's too much science in it?
To some degree, and the pseudoscience is a thing, and I also feel
let me stop you there real quick because Hergé, whatever.
Ted.
He did a crap ton of research into space travel science at the time. Like he was consulting like scientists on this stuff. So a lot of the stuff that's in there that you might say, oh, that's just pseudoscience, is actually based on the science of the 1950s, before we actually sent somebody to outer space into the moon. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff in here is scientific for the time, scientifically accurate, which I found both fascinating and rather dry.
Yeah.
And I thought it detracted from the story.
Yeah, and there isn't as much adventure, but I think it may also be the fact, when did this come out? This was
52,
like
I want to say.
52. For some reason, and it's probably a very simple reason.
Date of publication, originally in the newspaper Tintin magazine, March 1950 to September of 1950, and then picked up again 2 years later. We'll talk about that here in just a moment.
When we talk about trying to get to the moon and, the literal space race, I think Cold War, 60s, United States and Russia. And it may have been the fact that I was kind of expecting, or maybe, on some level, again, probably due to ethnocentrism, expecting that here's an enemy spy kind of thing, or here's all of these, we have to get there before the bad people, and just kind of unnerved throughout this whole thing. But as soon as you said, are they taking advantage of a man who clearly is, going through the early stages of dementia, I'm like, is that why this was so creepy? Because there are moments where you feel like calculus is going to die.
Yeah. There's also the question of, are you put off because whoever the spy network is, the man in the lower corner looks surprisingly like FDR? That's actually a good point. I don't know. And I feel like definitely the dryness of it is a thing. There's a whole sequence with Captain Haddock, and they're trying to put him in a vacuum and show him what a spacesuit would be like. That's interesting. And throughout that whole sequence, I went, he looks like Iron Man. And why is this 15, 16, 18 pages? Why is this going on and on and on? And I couldn't think of anything other than that episode of Gilligan's Island where they're trying to, they're putting the 4 male castaways through the centrifuge to figure out who'd be best to go up into space. And I'm just like, it felt like a very awkward sort of 60s story where I wasn't getting into what it was. And then I was kind of like drifting into, oh, well, where's this going to be? And just kind of like, well, and that's part of me why I think that this is fascinating, because when you look at the date of 1950, this is still several years before Kennedy says we're going to send a man to the moon before the end of the decade and return him safely to Earth. It's before that. It's like, wow. I mean, he's literally thinking about this stuff and looking into the research. He forms Studio Herge because he needed help with this project, specifically in the research area. So, you wouldn't have Studio Herge without Destination Moon and his need for research and to try to be as accurate as he possibly can in this. Now, Rodrigo, you said that you thought that this was dry because of the science stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I think Tintin in general is kind of not my jam, and that's okay. When I read a Tintin book, I like flap my cheeks a little bit and kind of do like a shoulder slap.
Yeah,
and I'm like, all right, got to get into the mood of like a Belgian comic about a boy detective from the 40s, right? I'm going in trying to be fair to Tintin, right? And this story in particular is actually very low in adventure and spends a lot of time talking about rocket propulsion, right? Like a significant amount of time. In fact, somebody on Blue Sky brought up the adorable scene in which a bear, like a baby
comes
bear,
out,
tries to eat Tintin's sandwich, and then like a dozen bears, like he feeds them, and then like a dozen bears come out, and I was like, that's the happiest I've been since I started reading this comic. I wish for more bears and less jet propulsion.
Yes, and they don't even, there's some spies, right, that have parachuted in. They've taken some pot shots at Tintin and others. There's been, attempted theft of the plans.
Right.
And then they don't find out who the spy is by the end of the issue, right? I mean, the volume ends with them going off into space and passing out with the ground control to Major Tom. Are you there? Come in, Tintin. and no response. So we're left on a cliffhanger so we can get into, Explorers on the Moon or whatever the next volume is.
on the Moon, I believe is what it is.
Yeah, that's what it is. And so I think that that's good. But again, if you were reading this in real time, you got right into the next volume in the magazine, page by page, week by week. There are some other things that I was kind of disappointed too, that there's not really resolution to anything except that Calculus is proven right in that he can send man into outer space. I mean, they kind of proved it when he sent a test rocket to go around orbit the moon and return home. So that was really good.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Do you know or do you remember how these were originally presented?
Yeah,
are these still coming out in a magazine?
Yes, these are all in magazine format at this time. Okay. And so that's what I wanted to say, is that there was actually a weird break. We say that this came out in 1953. That's the collected version. Originally, it started March 3rd, 1950. It didn't conclude until October of 1952 because there is an 18-month gap in the story. And that 18-month gap is because Hirsch had a mental breakdown. He was clinically depressed and had to go into, he had to be, I think, institutionalized, if I remember correctly, for his malady. And so there was a lot of question of, why did the story end where it did? People thought that he had died for a long time, and people were writing in begging him to continue to tell this story because they were all very invested in it. Finally, he got better and returned to work on this piece. But I found it quite fascinating that here's this person that had a literal breakdown while making this particular comic. Now, granted, he may have had some depression for other reasons, which I'll also get to in a moment. But, to come back from that and then to finish this, and by all accounts, in fact, Lagnus wrote in and said, the two albums that was Tintin's Moon Trip were probably my favorite back then, in competition with the Rackham albums. I did have both Moon albums and also the tapes. I don't know if those were the audio tapes or the movies that they've made out of this. Looking forward to tomorrow. Will be a good nostalgia trip for sure. They have made movies out of this, animated series out of this, computer games out of this, an animated series, and a BBC Radio 5 dramatization of this story. So this is popular for a lot of people. One of the reasons why he may have had a breakdown, this is my speculation, but you can go and read his biography and maybe point to this as well. Something that I really wasn't aware of, and we've been doing Tintin for years, Hirsch as a Nazi sympathizer, at least that he was accused of, because when the Nazis came in and took over Belgium, he started producing Nazi propaganda. It was either that or go to jail or get killed or whatever, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But like the very first adventure is also the very first album or book of Tintin, also anti-Semitic, in that the hero is obviously a bad portrayal of a Jewish person. Once World War II was over and people started pointing fingers, Hirsch was definitely got a lot of fingers pointed at him. And at one point he contemplated going to Argentina to relocate because of all the pressure that he was seeing. Also not a good look for today's
in retrospect, certainly not a good look.
Yeah. He did not do that, but I can imagine that you're talking 1950 and you are suddenly under this extreme pressure from, 5 years or whatever, 2-3 years after the war, and people are pointing fingers at you all the time. I don't know if he was having an affair at this time, but I can see that all of this stuff can kind of come crashing down on him. And I'm not trying to paint him in a bad light, but I'm trying to put this into context that when we look at this and people are like, oh, why is this so beloved? Well, because it is an adventure. It is science. It is all these things. But there's also this really weird story behind what was going on while this piece was being made. I also find it interesting that, again, there's not a lot of rockets in the early 1950s. The red and white checkered rocket that they go to the moon in. Take a guess what that's based on?
V2?
Yeah. Based on the V2 rocket in the design. Now, granted, those were the only images that he may have had access to as far as what a rocket looked like. And so he's thought, well, obviously everyone's going to paint their rockets like this because that's the thing. But as you go through the Brussels airport, and you see that big model display of the rocket, realize that is based on a V2 rocket. Yeah.
But isn't that a gorgeous splash? It's like page 42.
Oh yeah, where they're showing you the schematic of the rocket ship. Yeah, that's why I said it's the science part of that is really cool.
Of the ship and the gantries.
Oh yeah, sure.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's a great design.
Beautiful.
A lot of people have toys based on these rockets. That's how popular this is. I think even, I don't know if it was Lagnus or someone else who had shared their picture of two of their toy rockets with the album or with their volume of this story of Tintin. It is very much beloved, and I can understand why. This is science. I mean, this is that time period that I say where magic ends and science takes over. And everybody was all about this. So I can see why this is a very popular album. And I think the fact that Lagnus says both of the albums, I think you have, just like the Unicorn Adventure one that we did, that was a 2-parter that was turned into the movie. I think this is one that is also that thing where you probably have to read them both together to really get the full appreciation of what's going on. But yeah. Anything else? What other thoughts do you guys have? I've kind of put a lot of
I feel like
deep thoughts into this.
I feel like my whining about the ending of What If Hulky Hulk Hulks kind of applies here too, because I understand that when you're collecting a book, you don't necessarily collect everything. You have to take into account, okay, I'm going to have this price point. I'm going to do whatever it is. It's 1950 fav, so things are not the same expectation as now. I feel like there was a greater reliance on continued stories in that era to try and get you coming back. But I feel like having it end just as Team Tintin heads off to La Lune really does feel like, man, why am I getting half a story? What have I done this week to only get the first half?
Yeah, but if you go back to the other adventures that we've talked about, it's the exact same thing, right? The unicorn, the submarine treasure, the Red Rackham's treasure story, that was split into 2 parts, and it was the same thing. Although one part was more complete than the other, but if the destination is the moon, they kind of, got pretty close here. Yeah. Rodrigo?
I mean, it does kind of, to me, it seems to suffer from that, but maybe the original intended audience was probably fine with this sort of pacing.
Oh, sure.
It is like, I mean, like Tintin gets shot in this.
Mm-hmm.
True.
But
and he survived.
Even the stakes are kind of low in general. Like there's whoever the bad guys are have this plan for what they're gonna do, and the plan isn't gonna hurt anybody directly, right? It's like the plan is basically they're trying to steal the plans for the rocket, and they have a master plan to do that, which Tintin, of course, figures out. And so the good guys try to mitigate it, and it's like, oh, are they going to be able to do it? Blah, blah, blah. That's some tense stuff. But again, you think about it, and it's like, it's like somebody else is going to get a hold of this rocket, which has implications for the future. Whatever nation controls magnetism controls the world, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like weirdly the stakes are kind of low.
I think
also interesting that at no point does anybody bring up the fact that Tintin's a journalist.
Right.
It's like oh, it's all top secret, secrety, super secret stuff. Like nobody tells them anything going in. And then I fully believe that Professor Calculus could have just forgotten that Tintin's a journalist, and that's how he knows him. But surely all of these other high-level government officials in this made-up country have done their research, and they know Tintin and Haddock. Surely one of them would have been like, is it wise to bring a yeah, to bring a journalist, to bring somebody whose impulse is going to be to like tell the truth about what happened here, especially one of such integrity as Tintin. But like Tintin is immediately all in with this random country getting to
Yes.
the moon before anybody else, and it's like was everybody just like, God, please, just anybody but the Americans making it to the moon first.
And I mean, there may be some Euro pride going in on this, or
Sure.
just, I think, when I think about that, this is being serialized, and we may be getting one full page a week or a day or whatever it is. I think that there's some interesting pacing going on there, because as this story starts off, and they're like, "Oh yes, Mr. Captain Haddock and Mr. Tintin, please come with us." Okay, where are we going? We cannot tell you. Get on the plane. Okay. Who is those strange people following us? We can't tell you. There's this real ominous, especially now in hindsight, you look at this and like know that this is the start of the Cold War, and that Russia is taking over Central Europe, and the Ukraine area, that part of Central Europe.
Yeah,
And
the
you-
Balkans. and
yeah, the
stuff.
Balkans, and you really get this sense that, oh, these are Russians. These guys are being kidnapped, and maybe Calculus is being forced to do these things, and they've tricked Tintin because the only way that he'll continue is if his friends are there and safe or whatever. So there is this kind of ominous boding that goes on until they get there, and they're like, "Oh no, welcome to our country. We're gonna develop rockets first and get to the moon." And then you're like, and then there's like, "Oh, but someone's trying to kill and sabotage everything, unless it's just crazy old Mr. Calculus getting his age on and throwing his nuclear plants." The other thing is, like, they go into detail about how a nuclear reactor works,
Right?
which was also very surprising at the time. So I don't know. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this book. On the one hand, it is an interesting read. It's interesting that the whole studio came about because of this book. It's interesting to know about the breakdown in the middle of this story, and then to try to figure out exactly where that occurred. I'm sure you could look at that by looking at the dates in the panels, and then seeing how maybe the story changed when he came back to finish the story. I think that the fact that there was so much research going into this is fascinating, but kind of at the end of the day, it's probably, I don't know, the Pharaohs, the cigars of the Pharaohs or whatever it is, might be a little bit more dry. I know there's one, maybe even last year's was really dry, but this is not. Maybe when we read the next part next year, I'll have a different thought. But my thought on this one was, it's okay, better than average, not my favorite Tintin. Or if we're using the elements SnSn. So that's my thought. It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite. So what about you, Matthew? What are your final thoughts?
I have a strange relationship with Tintin, because Tintin reminds me of a childhood in the 1970s and reading bits and pieces and chunks of it here and there in like Highlights magazine.
Yeah, Highlights. Yep.
And I feel like it's kind of like pizza. Even the worst Tintin is okay Tintin.
Yeah.
But you do have to sit and wonder why they chose to put pineapple on this particular Tintin. And there's a lot of that in here. And I don't hate it. I don't love it as much as I enjoyed Haddock's Treasure. And I seem to remember complaining a lot about Haddock's Treasure. So you got that going for you, which is nice. But it's pretty okay. It's not overtly crazy racist, which I feel that I feel like that right now, as we get into out of the 40s and into the 50s, as we've run into that so many times with the Tintins and the Asterixes, just having that is kind of like I'll take a breath. It's good.
Yeah. What about you, Rodrigo? What are your final thoughts on Destination Moon?
I think that the Tintin magic is here, but I think the author kind of wrote himself into a literal corner by saying the characters cannot exit this facility for pretty much the entirety of it. It really relies on Captain Haddock running into things for its humor.
Yeah.
It shoehorns in the twins and then kind of forgets about them for a while.
Yes.
it just seems that like the formula is off for this one. And I think what happened was that like a healthy dose of jet propulsion science was injected into it and just kind of threw all the other ingredients out of whack. I don't think it's bad. But I'd say pick it up from the library. First, flip to that page with like all the baby bears.
Yeah.
And then know that at least for the first half of the book, you have that to look forward to.
Yep. I was been trying to find. I always do this. I always forget. There's an artist I'm probably sure he's on Twitter and Instagram, but he does Indiana Jones and others in the style of Tintin, and it's really, really cool when you see his art. And I would encourage you to go check it out. And I know at one point he got a cease and desist, but now that Tintin is in public domain, I think he's back with a vengeance. What's his name?
Adam Murphy.
That's who
Adam
it is.
Adam Murphy Art on Instagram.
Yeah, definitely go follow him if you're not. I would at this point tell Disney that they should just give the go ahead to do an adaptation of one of the movies and have Adam Murphy do it in this art style. And they would be totally down and cool with it. I would even say now that there are no new Tintins being developed or being released, unless, of course, there are, and I don't know about it. I would also say that Adam Murphy might be a good successor to telling new Tintin adventures, because I think his art is really good. So Adam Murphy Art on the Instagrams. Go check it out. All right, everybody. Nice. That is where we are going to wrap it up this week. Next week, I think this is something that everyone's both looking forward to and dreading. We are going to be doing a push for the next month and a half. We are diving in to the Void Rivals universe, the Energon universe. So for the next month, we'll be looking at Void Rivals, Transformers, Duke, Cobra Commander, Scarlet, Destro, and whatever G.I. Joe issues are out. By the time we get there, I think there's only going to be 4 of the 6 issues. So we're getting deep into the Energon universe beginning next week on the Major Spoilers podcast. Why? Because we know that you love comics. We do too. And we will talk with you soon.
If I had the X-ray vision of a Superman, I could save a few bucks and stand around and read through the covers of the comics on the stand. But although every other page would be backwards, I suppose, I could still read the evens and the odds. Well, I don't know. Guess I haven't thought this all the way through. Plus, as soon as the comic book store guy knew, they kicked my butt out on the corner. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Think about a better way. If I was Hulk in green or gray, I could just bust through that brick wall, take their comic books away. But then the little meat would deal with all the tanks and bombs and guns. Have you ever tried to read a series with all that going on? Guess I need to rethink this plan. How would I back and board my comics with such huge hands? Guess I already told ya. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. If I'm Stark Raven, rich like a man of iron, I might not be surprised to find that I might actually have the heart cold to follow an entire storyline. But would I really even need to read up on all those escapades? I mean, who needs such distractions when your sister's such a babe? But the downside is such a beast, being shot up in a funny in the Middle East with a gang sign throwing soldier. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah. What a major spoiler. Whoa. What a major spoiler.
Major Spoilers Podcast, copyright 2009.
Major Spoilers Podcast, copyright 2010.
Major Spoilers is copyright 2011. Major Spoilers is copyright 2012. Major Spoilers is copyright 2013. Major Spoilers is copyright 2014. This podcast is copyright 2015 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2016 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2017 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2018 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2019 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2020 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2021 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2022 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2023 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.
This podcast is copyright 2024 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC. This podcast is copyright 2025 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.